Chapter 581. Olivia reflexively tried to move back, but she forgot there was an open wardrobe behind her. She had placed herself in an even smaller space. She pushed against Ethan's chest with both her arms and was blushing. Unfortunately, she couldn't get on her phone and ask the internet what she should do in this situation. Ethan tapped her lightly on the nose. "It's cold outside. You should wear more clothes." Then, he let go of her and moved away. Olivia was finally able to breathe fresh air again. She said, "All right." She sighed in relief. She thought he had wanted to do something to her. Ethan moved out of the closet and said, "Breakfast is ready." "Okay, I'm coming." Olivia waited for her face to stop blushing before she headed downstairs frantically for breakfast. She went out with Ethan after the meal. Looking at the expensive car parked outside, Olivia gulped and asked, "Is this your car?" "It's yours too." Olivia got into the car nervously. It seemed like Ethan wasn't after her money, or was the bankruptcy of her family faked? She was in a daze as she stared at the cars driving past. It snowed heavily last night, so the city was covered in snow. It made for a dreamy landscape. The car quickly arrived at a downtown area before stopping at an alleyway. There weren't any skyscrapers in this area, mostly just single-story buildings. "Does this place trigger your memory? You used to live here before you were married." Olivia looked at the bustling streets with stalls and food trucks. Nothing came to mind, but she felt like everything was familiar. She had mixed feelings when they arrived at the Fordham residence. "Let's go in." Ethan pushed the gate open. The place was frequently cleaned, so there weren't any dead leaves or fallen branches. Even the snow on the paths had been swept away. The plum tree in the yard was in full bloom. A white cat rushed out from a corner, scaring Olivia. The cat purred. "Don't be afraid. This is Snowball, the cat you grew up with." Olivia crouched down, and Snowball jumped into her arms. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Snowball purred happily in Olivia's arms while rubbing her face on Olivia's head. "I'll show you what Dad left you." "Okay." Ethan brought her to a room filled with wooden items. There was a crib, rocking horse, rattle toy, and wooden sword. These are the things Dad made for our babies before he passed. Sadly, he didn't get to see them. Each of these items was filled with Jeff's love. Olivia suddenly felt an overwhelming wave of sadness coming over her. For a moment, she thought of a frail man slowly carving some wood with a carving knife. The dragon on the wooden sword looked especially lifelike, but it wasn't finished. There was a part of it left uncarved. Olivia's tears started to flow as she said, "He must have spent a lot of time on these, right?" "Yeah, fate played a cruel joke on him." Ethan gently wiped her tears away. "Don't cry, Liv. It's all behind us now. You still have me." Olivia buried her head on his shoulder, and her tears dripped down to his collar. She sobbed, saying, "Why do I feel so sad even though I can't remember anything? Ethan, did I forget something I shouldn't have?" Ethan patted her head lightly. "Liv, it's all just pain and suffering. It's better to forget about them. Dad would have wanted you to live happily too. He wouldn't want you to wallow in grief every day." Chapter 582. What happened was completely different from what Olivia had thought. The things her father left her were indeed priceless to her, but they didn't really have any actual monetary value. So, the comments on her post were wrong. Ethan wasn't after her money. In that case, what could she have that a man like Ethan would covet? They stayed at the Fordham residence for a while longer, but Olivia couldn't remember anything. Before they left, Snowball followed Olivia out. She wanted to suggest bringing Snowball with her but stopped herself. It was like she subconsciously knew that Ethan didn't like cats. "What's wrong?" Olivia pointed to Snowball and asked, "Can I bring her with me?" Snowball was an old cat and didn't have long to live. Olivia wanted to stay with Snowball for the remainder of her lifespan. Ethan agreed readily, "Sure, I'll get someone to bring her home. Let's continue our date." Olivia pondered over his words. "So, this is a date." Smiling, Ethan held her hand. "What else could it be? It's perfectly normal for us to go on dates. We're married. I'm legally allowed to take you on dates." Ethan was in the driver's seat, and he helped Olivia with her seatbelt. "Did we used to go on dates often?" Ethan looked straight ahead and said truthfully, "Not really. I used to be very busy and often went on business trips. I didn't have much time to spend with you. But, from now on, I'll try my best to make time for you." Ethan's expression was calm. There wasn't any sign that pointed to him lying. "Liv, your visa has already been applied for. If you don't have any objections, we can go to Zealandia at the end of the month after I'm done with the work on hand. You can further your studies there. You can meet my mom too." Olivia was puzzled. Have I never met her before? Burgess had mentioned that they had lived with Ethan's grandparents before, but she didn't mention Ethan's mom. "No, my mom has a mental condition and has been getting treatment these past years. I didn't bring you to meet her before because I was afraid it might exacerbate her condition. Her condition has stabilized over the past 6 months. I think it'll be okay for you to meet her." Olivia felt anxious because she was about to meet her mother-in-law. "What kind of person is your mother?" Ethan fell silent. He didn't know how to describe his mother. Since he was young, they had spent the better part of their lives apart from each other. After his sister was born, Ethan had to take care of her. His mother's condition was unstable, and when she had an episode, she would be full of bloodlust and get violent. Leia wasn't the only one who got abused. Ethan had also been hurt by his mother when he was young. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Since he was young, he had mixed feelings about his mother. He loved her but also feared her. He forced himself to be independent and subsequently became busy with many things. So, he never really interacted with his mother all that much. Whenever his mother had an episode, she wouldn't even recognize him as her son. Sometimes, she'd even treat him like an enemy. He never felt his mother's love that much. He barely even saw her in a normal state. So, he didn't really know what to say about his mother. "You'll know when you see her. But will she even like me? I heard that mothers-in-law never get along with their daughters-in-law." Ethan smiled when he heard Olivia's murmurs. Holding her hand, he said, "Of course, she'll like you. My wife is the most lovable person in the world. No one could possibly hate you." Face flushed, Olivia shook her hand free. "Focus on driving. We don't want to get into an accident." "Liv, would you be sad if I died?" Ethan suddenly asked. Chapter 583. Olivia's heart skipped a beat when she heard that. Turning to look at Ethan, she said, "You shouldn't say things like that." Ethan looked into the distance and said calmly, "People die all the time. If I get into an accident, accidents don't happen that frequently. Stop saying things like that." Olivia felt gloomy. She didn't like the word, accident. She subconsciously placed a hand on her stomach. They spent the rest of the trip in silence. Ethan brought Olivia to the closest mall, and they went shopping. Then, they got some food and watched a movie like a normal couple. It was already past 9 p.m. when they finished the movie. Also, it was getting cold out. So, there weren't a lot of people on the streets. Shiny decorations were hung up everywhere, illuminating the drifting snowflakes. The scene looked very romantic. "Are you cold?" Ethan asked. "It's fine. The car is just a short walk away." Ethan noticed the misty breath she exhaled from her mouth. So, he took off his coat and draped it over her. "Let's go," he said. "But I'm not cold." Ethan held her hand even tighter. Olivia had a feeling that he was afraid she would be gone if he let go. She felt a tinge of happiness as she looked at Ethan's big and warm hand wrapped around hers. It felt like she had waited a long time for this to happen. Olivia abruptly stopped in her tracks. Ethan waited for her patiently. "What's wrong? Look, there's a tree in front of you." There was a tree with a lot of red ribbons hanging from it. Christmas was approaching, and vendors were trying to attract customers by setting up a wishing tree. The tree in question was over a century old. Some marketing whiz utilized this tree for a promotional event. Customers could get a ribbon if they spent over $800 in the mall. They could get a strip of ribbon when they showed their receipt. Even though it was apparent that it was just a gimmick to drive sales up, many young couples still participated in the event. But $800 was no small amount, which was why there weren't a lot of ribbons on the tree. Olivia stopped to take a picture and was ready to leave but noticed that Ethan had taken out a receipt to redeem the ribbons. They had spent quite a bit at the mall, so Ethan received 10 ribbons. This is obviously just a marketing gimmick, Olivia complained. Ethan looked like he was a materialistic person. Surely he wouldn't fall for something like this. Ethan held the ribbons in one hand and a pen in the other. He slowly began to write down their names on the ribbons carefully. He only raised his head after he had finished writing on all the ribbons. He gazed at Olivia tenderly. Liv, I've never been one for superstitions. But ever since you've been with me, I just want to be with you for the rest of my life. I don't care what supernatural forces I have to believe in as long as my wish can be granted. Olivia muttered under her breath, but how will it work if you don't even know what to believe in? I don't care. All I care about is you. The twinkling lights that hung from the tree cast a gentle glow on Ethan's face. Olivia could see his love for her overflowing from his eyes. She felt like something tugged at her heartstrings. We have 10 tries. Let's throw them together. Olivia held 5 ribbons in her hands. Initially, she felt like it was just like a carnival game, but when she saw Ethan's serious expression, she began to take it seriously too. There was a tiny ball tied to the end of each ribbon. They just needed to aim the ball at one of the branches. It wasn't that hard. Olivia aimed and threw one of her ribbons. The ball just barely missed the closest branch. Chapter 584. Olivia was disappointed that she missed on her first try. It's okay, we still have plenty of chances. Okay. Olivia tried throwing the ribbons a few more times. She was an athletic woman, so she had enough strength to throw the balls up high. But the balls either scraped the branches before falling, or they missed completely. She didn't even land one successfully after 5 tries. Olivia wondered if karma didn't allow her to land her ribbons on the tree because she didn't want it to happen. She wasn't worried because Ethan had 5 ribbons too. She figured it would be a simple task for a man. Olivia shrugged and said, "It's your turn." Ethan threw his first ribbon high up. It was clear he was aiming for the top of the tree. He threw it with just enough force and at the right angle. Strangely, the ribbon landed on a branch, but the ball slowly slid down. Olivia saw Ethan's expression turn cold. She quickly comforted him, saying, "It's just an accident. You'll get it next time." Ethan threw the remaining 4 ribbons, but the same thing happened every single time. They landed on the branch, but they didn't stay put. Even the vendor was dumbfounded. He wasn't superstitious as well, but other participants were able to hang their ribbons on the tree with 1 try. He hadn't seen anyone failing after 9 tries. Ethan had 1 more ribbon left, and his expression was chilling. Olivia chuckled dryly, trying to come up with an excuse for him. But she saw Ethan flipping over the railing and walking straight to the tree. He put his palm on the tree trunk with his back facing everyone. No one could see what he was doing. After a few seconds, he threw the ribbon. Everyone's eyes were on the ribbon. Olivia jumped excitedly when she saw that the ribbon was hanging on the tree. Ethan's expression finally eased into a smile. All right. He walked back to Olivia and said, "Let's go." Ethan held Olivia's hand and left. Then, a sudden breeze blew at them, and Olivia shivered from the cold. The ribbons on the tree swayed in the wind, and one was lifted into the air. Then, Olivia and Ethan heard a metallic clink. Something had fallen next to them. Olivia lowered her head to look and saw that it was the ribbon that Ethan had just thrown up the tree. None of the other ribbons on the tree had fallen despite swaying in the wind. The vendor scratched his head and muttered, "Now that's not something you see every day." Ethan didn't say anything, but his expression was icy. It was like the air around him became even colder. This must be a coincidence. You don't have to let it affect you. For some reason, Olivia had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. Ethan patted Olivia on the head and said with a faint smile, "It's just a kid's game. Of course, I won't let it bother me. Let's go home." Olivia relaxed when she saw him smile. She picked up the ribbon and said, "We can keep this as a souvenir." Okay. Ethan didn't even look back, and Olivia didn't let what happened bother her. It was 3 a.m. Holding a shovel in his hands, Calvin asked in confusion, "Mr. Miller, what did this tree do to you?" I heard it was supposed to be uprooted when the plaza was under construction. But every one of the 10 excavators broke down before they could start. People think this tree has mystical powers, which is why they've been keeping it around. Why would you want to uproot it all of a sudden? Ethan blew a smoke ring from his mouth as his arm rested on the car window. The cigarette flickered between his fingers. He uttered emotionlessly, "It got in the way." Chapter 585. Calvin couldn't for the life of him understand how the tree could have gotten in Ethan's way. Did Ethan run into the tree while he was shopping? He didn't seem like someone so clumsy, nor did he seem like he would be so petty. Even a child wouldn't hold a grudge against a tree, right? Much less an adult. That didn't fit Ethan's personality. Calvin had seen Ethan raise his enemies to the ground, but it was the first time they were doing that to a tree. Brent pulled Calvin over to the side and whispered, "Just follow the orders you were given. Can't you see that Mr. Miller is in a bad mood? Everyone else is trying to avoid angering him, but here you are, making matters worse. I was just curious. Mrs. Miller has already returned to him. He should be happy. Why would he come out so late at night just to uproot a tree? Talk less, work more. All right, tell the men to start. I'm curious to see if the stories about the tree are real." Calvin started to direct the excavator with the shovel in hand. "That's right, move forward." The excavator suddenly stopped moving as it got closer to the tree. The operator couldn't start the excavator back up no matter how much he tried. "That's weird. This excavator is new. It was perfectly fine before. Why would it break down now? Damn, is the tree really magical?" Calvin's face paled in fright. He quickly went to Ethan to update him on the situation. Then, he raised his head to see Ethan standing under the street lamp with a chainsaw in hand. He cast a long shadow on the road. Calvin was taken aback. This looked like a scene straight out of a horror flick. Mr. Miller, are you for real?" Ethan approached the tree with a stormy expression while carrying the chainsaw. Ignoring Calvin, he raised his head to look at the tree. "I told you that if you really had powers, you should do your part. But if you don't want to bless my relationship with Liv, why should I keep you around?" Calvin, who was standing behind Ethan, asked in bewilderment, "Mr. Miller, are you talking to the tree?" Ethan started revving the chainsaw into life. "Since you want to destroy my relationship with Liv, I'll pull you up by the roots." That was what Ethan had said when he approached the tree earlier that day. The clouds started churning, and the snow fell even heavier. Calvin held Brent's hand, stammering, "Brother, I don't know if Mr. Miller has lost his mind, but the weather is getting terrifying. Was it this cloudy when we arrived?" Even though the plaza was well lit by street lamps, the dark, churning clouds were still terrifying. "Mr. Miller, why don't we give it a rest? It's just a tree." The sound of the chainsaw drowned out Calvin's voice. Ethan raised the chainsaw, poised to swing. But thunder suddenly crackled in the sky. "Oh my God!" Calvin yelled in fear. Generally, there were more thunderstorms in spring and summer. They were relatively rare in winter. There also weren't any signs before the thunder crackled so abruptly. And it happened above the skies of a spacious plaza at 3 a.m. The hair on everyone's back was standing on end. Even the usually stoic Brent raised his concern. "Mr. Miller, why don't we stop? It's pretty dangerous. What if the lightning strikes?" In response, Ethan swung the chainsaw at the tree without hesitation. The jarring sound echoed in the plaza. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot as he said through gritted teeth, "Since you didn't want to bless my relationship with Liv, I'll cut you down. I'll cut down anything that stands between me and Liv." Ethan was determined to be with Olivia for the rest of his life. No one would be able to stop him. Chapter 586. Everyone in the vicinity was dumbfounded. Ethan wasn't acting like himself. No one knew why he was so hung up on the tree. Amidst the crackling thunder, sparks flew from the chainsaw in Ethan's hands. "Brent, look at that lightning. I'm so scared that it might strike Mr. Miller. Did Mrs. Miller upset him again?" Brent replied calmly, "I don't know if Mrs. Miller is the one who upset him. But only matters relating to Mrs. Miller can make Mr. Miller lose control like this. I'm worried about his current state of mind. I know, right? Mr. Miller used to be so composed. His emotions were almost impossible to discern. However, after the series of incidents with Mrs. Miller, he has become mentally unstable. I fear that he might become like Mrs. Miller Sr. Mrs. Miller can still act as a calming influence when she's by his side. I'm worried he'll lose all reason if Mrs. Miller leaves him. The consequences would be unimaginable if he were to lose control completely. Kelvin furrowed his brows. But the drug seems to be very effective. Mrs. Miller has lost her memories completely. Besides, Mr. Miller will be bringing Mrs. Miller away from this city that's filled with sad memories for her. The assassins might not be able to find Mrs. Miller then. After a while, Mrs. Miller can get pregnant again, and they can raise a child together. As long as Mrs. Miller doesn't regain her memories, everything will be better. Brent sighed deeply and said, if only it's that simple. There's so much uncertainty in this world. If there's even the slightest hitch in Mr. Miller's plan, his relationship with Mrs. Miller will be over. And there won't be any more room for reconciliation. Hopefully, things can stay the way they are now, and nothing unexpected ever happens again. Hopefully. Olivia was sound asleep when the thunder crackled and woke her up. The sound of thunder scared her so much that her face paled, and her entire body trembled. It was as if something heart-wrenching had happened to her during a thunderstorm in the past. Ethan. Olivia looked to the side and saw no one next to her. Even the sheets were cold, which meant that he had been gone for some time. She wondered if he had gone to work in the study. Olivia no longer felt like sleeping. She didn't know why, but her heart was beating quickly, and she was gripped by fear. As she walked out of the bedroom, the thunder crackled again. Olivia unlocked the study via the fingerprint lock. It was pitch black in the study. He wasn't there. Where are you, Ethan? Olivia called out timidly. The villa was empty. There wasn't anyone there other than herself. Thunder roared once again. Olivia crouched on the floor in fear and hugged her legs. She placed a hand on her stomach and called out for her baby. She did it subconsciously, but she was already in tears when she returned to her senses. Olivia touched her face. She could feel the cold and wet sensation of her tears on her fingers. She looked at the snow out of the window in a daze. Did she lose her baby in a thunderstorm? She could see the image of a person jumping from a high place in her head. Where was that? She felt like her head was being torn to pieces when she tried to recall what had happened. It was really painful, so painful that she wanted to die. She could barely breathe. She took out her phone with great effort and dialed Ethan's number. Liv, you're awake. Ethan seemed to be in a noisy place where machinery was buzzing. Enduring the pain, Olivia asked, where are you? Something happened at a construction site. What's wrong? And nothing. I'll stop bothering you. Olivia didn't want to bother Ethan with her trivial matters. As she was holding her head in her hands, she felt a pain in her stomach. The intense pain from two parts of her body was suffocating her. She didn't understand why her stomach was hurting. She didn't even eat any spicy food that day. Ethan was worried about Olivia, so he came home as soon as possible. As he returned home, covered in snow, the first thing he noticed was Olivia. She was curled up on the floor. Liv. Chapter 587. Only a wall lamp was lit in the large bedroom. Olivia was wearing thin pajamas and was barefooted as she curled up in a corner. Her face was filled with terror. Ethan's heart broke when he saw that, and he dashed up to Olivia. What happened, Liv? As if grabbing her final lifeline, Olivia threw herself into Ethan's embrace. When Ethan saw the wet trails of tears on her face, his heart ached terribly. Don't cry, I'm back. Ethan's body was still wet, but Olivia didn't mind it at all. She gripped Ethan's arm with both hands. Tell me, how did our children die? Why are you mentioning the children again? Reaching out, Ethan wiped away the tears on her face. I think I saw a person jump from a very high place. As Ethan comforted her, he patted her back. It was a stormy night, and the rain was heavy that night. The road was dangerous. The car was out of control, and it veered off the winding mountain road. In the end, it fell into the sea. Is that the image in your mind? Olivia shook her head. She kept mumbling to herself, I don't know. I don't know anything at all. I just feel pain in my heart. When I recall the past, my head hurts as well. It feels like it's going to explode. Ethan hugged her head tightly. Then don't think about it. It's in the past now. I didn't want to mention these things in front of you because I didn't want you to be sad. Liv, I've said this before. You have me. Let's not think about the past anymore, alright? Olivia slowly calmed down in his embrace. After choking a few times, she stopped crying. Seeing that Olivia didn't even wear her shoes, Ethan couldn't help but complain, I know that we have a heater at home, but you can't go around barefooted. You might get wet easily. Your body is weak enough as it is. It can't handle the cold. Olivia replied, all right. When I woke up, I didn't see you anywhere, and there was thunder outside. I don't know what came over me. I was very scared just now. I looked for you everywhere. I'm sorry. I won't leave without telling you ever again. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. Crouching down, he picked her up in his arms and took her back to the room. If you can't find me in the future, just contact me or Brent. Don't worry about troubling me. We're a married couple, so you can tell me anything, alright? While Olivia settled into the warm bed, Ethan poured a glass of warm water for her. You've been crying for so long. You must be thirsty now. Olivia drank some water to wet her throat. Her tears had stopped, but her eyes were still red. She looked like a little rabbit. What happened at the construction site? It's so late at night. Nothing important. I'm overseeing the project, so I can only rest assured after I take a look at it, Ethan explained in brief. Then, he took off his coat. Olivia noticed some sawdust on the black woolen coat. She thought that it was from the construction site, so she didn't think too much about it. Ethan returned to the bed. Then, he reached out and took Olivia into his arms. It's still early, so you can sleep a little while longer. I'll tell you a story. Okay. Like a startled rabbit, Olivia leaned in his embrace. As she listened to his attractive and melodious voice, she fell asleep. She didn't notice that she was becoming more dependent on Ethan by the day. She had spent several days with him now. Her initial suspicion had turned into familiarity. She could see that he loved her for real. The look in his eyes and those tiny details couldn't be faked. Olivia realized that this man was deeply in love with her. His fingers gently caressed her hair. He pampered her like a child. She could feel the wedding ring on his ring finger. For the past few days, she never saw him taking it off. It felt good to be loved. It felt so good that she could temporarily forget about losing her parents and her children. Her memory was blank, but she wasn't scared in the least. Her small hands trembled as they wrapped around Ethan's waist. Ethan froze. This tiny movement was proof that Olivia was beginning to open up to him. She was starting to accept him. His heart leapt in joy, and he tried his best to suppress the smile on his lips. And so, the prince and the princess lived happily ever after. They were inseparable until the end. The woman in his arms had already fallen asleep. Lowering his head, he planted a kiss on her. Liv, we'll also live happily for the rest of our lives, just like that fairy tale, he thought. Chapter 588. Olivia slowly got used to life without memories, even though she always felt an emptiness in her heart. Also, she would sometimes stare at a spot and zone out for some reason. But Ethan pampered her greatly. This was proof enough that love could melt everything. Olivia counted the days. She would be going overseas with Ethan in a few days. She heard that in the past, she often traveled around the world on her days off. She had been to many places, but sadly, she couldn't remember any of them now. Olivia fantasized quite a lot about life overseas. She felt like she previously didn't want to stay in this city at all. Before they left, Olivia suggested that they visit the graves of their loved ones. After all, they had no idea when they would be coming back. As soon as winter rolled around, Aldenvine would be covered in snow. It was very cold, and the roads were quite slippery as well. Olivia wore a thick down jacket, covering herself from head to toe. The mountain path was difficult to walk on. Ethan extended a hand toward her. Compared to a few days ago, Olivia didn't think twice before placing her hand on his palm now. Olivia's body temperature was cooler. She was very sensitive to the cold, especially in winter. Ethan thought that these changes were because Olivia had given birth prematurely twice. It had weakened her body. So, he pampered and took care of Olivia even more than he used to. After making sure that there was no danger, he would allow Olivia to meet Connor. No matter how hard it was for her to get pregnant again, they still had a child together. So, they wouldn't feel regretful about it. The Black Raven's loss due to Olivia had become the joke of the industry. Hence, the industry had added Olivia's name to the blacklist. No one dared to accept any missions that involved her. They all feared that they might get involved in needless trouble. In their line of work, it would take a long time for them to raise an elite. No one would want to risk their people for a mission. The assassins were out of the way now, but the mastermind might go for other options. Thus, Connor's identity shouldn't be announced yet. Enveloped by Ethan's burning warmth, Olivia's hand gradually grew warm as well. The first grave they visited was Eugenia's. Back home, Olivia had heard Madame Burgess' stories about Eugenia. Olivia even brought along some chips and milkshakes which Eugenia loved. Back then, Madame Burgess would tell Eugenia to avoid cold drinks at her age. Eugenia always retorted. She said that if she didn't drink cold drinks now, she wouldn't have another chance. From Madame Burgess' descriptions, Eugenia was an interesting old lady. She had pampered Olivia a lot too. Once at the grave, Olivia looked at the loving old woman in the photo. Even if she couldn't remember those things, she could still sense that Eugenia was very kind. "Grandma, I'm here. I'm sorry, I got into an accident and forgot everyone. You won't blame me for it, will you?" Kneeling on the ground, Olivia took out the drinks and the chips. "I heard that you love these, so I brought some over for you. Do try them and see if they taste the same as before." Ethan didn't say much. He simply placed Eugenia's favorite bouquet at the grave. His fingers rested upon Olivia's shoulder, and he said in a low voice, "Grandma, I'll take good care of Liv." A single sentence was enough. They were walking away from Eugenia's grave when Olivia stopped in her tracks. Ethan frowned deeply, a confused look passing over his eyes. "What's the matter, Liv?" Olivia looked up at the plum blossom on the branches. "Why would people plant plum trees here? It's so weird, but it looks quite nice. Every family has their traditions. It's getting late. Let's visit Dad's grave." Taking her hand, Ethan was about to leave when Olivia pointed at the photo of one of the gravestones. "Look, Ethan. The person in the photo looks a little like you." Chapter 589. Ethan, who used to be extremely patient with her, didn't have any intention of staying at that moment. He kept urging Olivia, "It's someone else's grave. There's nothing interesting to look at. Let's go." Olivia thought that it was bad luck to say such things. Still, she couldn't help but glance at it. Amazing. If her name wasn't Jody Ferguson, I would have thought that she's a relative of the Millers. Olivia repeated the name. Jody. Why does that name sound so familiar? Ethan, did I know her in the past? The gravestone was remade for Jody after Ethan had confirmed that Leia didn't die. All the information was changed to Jody's. Ethan didn't expect Olivia to be so hung up about it. After calming himself, Ethan answered calmly, "No, you didn't." Olivia glanced at the gravestone a few more times before looking away. "I must be overthinking it. There are so many people in this world, so it's normal for some to look alike. Let's go." Ethan took a cloak and draped it over her. His eyes were filled with tenderness. "Yes, the snow is falling heavily again. Let's finish up the rounds and go home as soon as possible." "Sounds good." Olivia left with Ethan. After taking a few steps, she still couldn't help but look back. The plum blossoms were blooming well. There was a layer of clear snow on the red petals. As the wind blew, the snowflakes and flowers rained down, covering the gravestone. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing." Olivia looked away, ignoring the unknown emotions in her heart. After visiting the graves, Olivia suggested dining at the restaurant from last time. Ethan got someone to reserve a table for them. Olivia liked being with Ethan. She wondered if it was because Ethan rarely spent time with her in the past. Taking Ethan's hand, Olivia strolled around the square. The two were very good looking. So, no matter where they went, people would be looking at them. Olivia asked curiously, I remember seeing a tree here that night. Why is it gone? The spot where the century-old tree stood was now covered with cement. It was also tiled just like its surroundings. Ethan was surprised that Olivia remembered. Ethan replied indifferently, perhaps it was blocking the view, so they cut it. What a pity. It was such a huge tree, and it was probably at least 100 years old. It's a waste to cut it down just like that. Both humans and trees have their fates. It's nothing worth your pity. Olivia scratched her head. She thought about the new coffee table and wooden chairs at home that were just delivered yesterday. They didn't lack any furniture at home, so she couldn't understand why they suddenly got more wooden furniture. Ethan had calmly said that a change of furniture would be nice. She didn't think too much about it back then. She just wondered how many trees had to be cut down to make a coffee table that big. Ethan, is it possible that the coffee table at home was made from this tree? Reaching out, Ethan patted her on the head. His expression was calm as always. What are you talking about, Liv? Why would I get mad at a tree and turn it into a coffee table? Olivia looked at the man's upright figure in the snowy wind. His handsome face was cold, and his movements were filled with endless nobility. He had a point. An elite like him wouldn't get mad at a tree. Olivia took Ethan's hand again. Sorry, I keep overthinking things. Let's go eat. Ethan patted the back of her hand. It's okay. We have to go somewhere after the meal. Where are we going? You'll know when we arrive. Like a child, Olivia eagerly looked forward to the surprise. It wasn't 6:30 p.m. yet, but she was already urging Ethan, hurry up. Where are we going? Reaching out, Ethan touched the tip of her nose. Let's go. She was taken to a high-end studio, where people would get customized makeovers. Olivia rarely came to places like this, so she felt a little wary. What are we doing here? Ethan patted her on the shoulder. Don't worry, someone will guide you. In a daze, Olivia was brought to the makeup room. Chapter 590. Olivia didn't know what Ethan was planning. She simply allowed the makeup artists to apply various cosmetics on her face. She could hear praises from time to time. Goodness, your skin is so supple. I can see that Mr. Miller treats you very well. It's not just your skin too. Even your features are flawless. Seriously, I've done many celebrities' makeup before. It doesn't matter whether they were born pretty or if they worked for it later on. I've never met someone with features as perfect as yours. Olivia was a little stunned by the praise. She asked in a small voice, where am I going? Why am I being dressed up like this? The makeup artists were surprised. Didn't Mr. Miller tell you? Well, then we won't tell you much either. We wouldn't want to ruin Mr. Miller's surprise. Before this, Brent had already told them not to reveal too much. The makeup artists didn't know which parts they should keep secret, so they simply shut up. They quietly dressed Olivia up. Suddenly, an ear-piercing voice sounded outside the door. I flew here just to get Emily Lowe to give me a makeover, but what's with this treatment? Do you know who I am? I'm sorry, Miss Olsen. Someone has already booked an appointment with Emily early on. Our other artists are quite famous too. I only want Emily. It's just a matter of money, right? I can pay double. Miss Olsen, it's not about the money. You ingrates. You're only working for the money anyway. Get Emily here. Despite being coaxed for a long time, the customer seemed to have a short temper. Seeing that Emily wasn't coming out, the customer dashed inside instead. Let me see who's so important that you'd refuse to let someone else book Emily. Olivia looked at the customer. The woman seemed to be her age, but her fashion style was quite bold. It was snowing heavily outside, but the woman was wearing long boots on her bare legs. It didn't matter since they were indoors. Still, Olivia couldn't quite accept this fashion style. When the woman saw Olivia, her expression turned fouler. You again. Why won't you leave me alone? I keep running into you everywhere I go. Olivia didn't remember the woman. She pointed at herself. Are you talking to me? Do we know each other? Lydia crossed her arms as she studied Olivia. They hadn't met in a few months, but Olivia seemed to have changed a lot. When Olivia was pregnant, she was quite stern when she hit Lydia. But now, she looked like an innocent woman. She even pretended not to know Lydia. My cousin isn't here, so why are you putting on an act? Your cousin. Olivia was confused. This woman didn't look like a friend, so she wondered if the woman was a relative. But she didn't seem too friendly. When she looked at Olivia, there was no respect in her eyes. Instead, her eyes were filled with enmity and disdain. Is this how you usually seduce my cousin? I'm warning you, no matter how you try to cling to him, it's no use. You're not on par with him at all. You can't even compare to a tenth of Nikki. Shut up. A stern man's voice suddenly sounded from the door. Ethan didn't expect someone to cause trouble during the time he took to change his clothes. Lydia had a special identity, so the bodyguards didn't dare to offend her. So, they could only get Ethan to come over as soon as possible. When Lydia saw Ethan walking over to them, a trace of nervousness appeared on her arrogant face. Gulping, she said in a small voice, cousin. What a coincidence. You're here as well. Ethan didn't waste his breath on her. Get lost. Sticking out her tongue, Lydia hastily ran away without even looking back. Ethan, is she your cousin? Yes. Why didn't you mention her before? I rarely keep in touch with her. Olivia frowned slightly. She said something about Nikki just now. Who is that? She's not important.